the University of Chicago, Rockefeller Foundation, Rockefeller Center. You know these names: prestigious institutions, respected philanthropies, American landmarks. What you don't know, every dollar that built them came from the same source, the most ruthless monopoly in American history, a business that crushed competitors, bribed politicians, and controlled an entire industry with an iron fist. John D. Rockefeller made $400 billion in today's money. He controlled 90% of American oil, and then he spent the rest of his life making sure you'd remember him as a philanthropist, not as the man who invented the corporate monopoly. This is the story they don't teach you in school. By 1880, one man controlled 9/10 of all oil refined in America. Standard Oil wasn't just a company, it was a machine designed to eliminate competition and extract maximum profit from every barrel. The profit margins were staggering: 300 to 500% during the monopoly years. Not 3 to 5%, 300 to 500%. That money built universities, funded medical research, created foundations that still operate today with endowments worth billions. But here's what they don't mention on the campus tours or in the foundation annual reports: how the money was made, the tactics used, the competitors destroyed, the politicians bought. John D. Rockefeller perfected a playbook that every monopolist since has studied: vertical integration, predatory pricing, secret rebates, cutthroat competition disguised as business strategy. In 1911, the Supreme Court finally broke Standard Oil apart, calling it an illegal monopoly. By then, Rockefeller was already pivoting. The robber baron was becoming America's greatest philanthropist. The whitewashing has been systematic, the rehabilitation complete. This is the story of how one man turned oil into the first American corporate empire, and how that fortune bought something even more valuable than money: respectability. Let's start with where oil came from. August 27th, 1859. Titusville, Pennsylvania. A man named Edwin Drake strikes oil at 69 feet. It's the first commercial oil well in America. The timing is perfect. Kerosene lamps are replacing whale oil. America needs illumination. And suddenly, there's a new source. The problem? Crude oil is useless. It needs to be refined into kerosene, and refining is expensive, complicated, and dangerous. Here's how it worked. You heat crude oil in a still. Different components vaporize at different temperatures. Kerosene comes off around 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Separate it, purify it, and you have lamp fuel. But in 1860, refining is chaotic. Small operators, inconsistent quality, explosions are common. The industry is brand new and completely unregulated. Enter John D. Rockefeller, born in 1839 in upstate New York. His father was a con man and bigamist who sold fake cancer cures. His mother was deeply religious. Young John absorbed lessons from both: ruthless pragmatism from his father, moral certainty from his mother. By age 16, Rockefeller is working as a bookkeeper in Cleveland. He's methodical, precise, obsessed with efficiency and cost control. At 23, he sees the oil boom and recognizes something crucial. Quote, "The oil business is in chaos. Whoever brings order will control everything." End quote. He doesn't want to drill for oil. Too risky, too dependent on finding new wells. He wants to refine it, control the choke point between crude oil and consumers. 1863. Rockefeller builds his first refinery in Cleveland with partners Maurice Clark and Samuel Andrews. Clark wants to stay small. Rockefeller wants scale. 1865. Rockefeller buys out Clark for $72,000. He's 26 years old and now runs the largest refinery in Cleveland. But Cleveland has dozens of refineries. Competition is fierce. Prices are volatile. Profit margins are thin. What Rockefeller understands that others don't: the real money isn't in refining. It's in controlling transportation. This is where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean this is where Rockefeller builds one of the largest fortunes in human history, using tactics that would later be made illegal. 1867. Rockefeller realizes that railroads are the key. Oil has to move by train from Pennsylvania to Cleveland to be refined, then to markets. Whoever controls shipping costs controls the industry. Here's his move. He approaches the Lakeshore Railroad with a proposal. Instead of shipping small quantities from many refineries, ship massive quantities from just Standard Oil. In exchange, give him a secret rebate. Not just a discount. A rebate. Meaning Rockefeller pays the standard rate publicly, but gets cash back privately. His competitors pay full price. He pays half. Let that sink in. But here's where it gets truly ruthless. Rockefeller negotiates something called a drawback. The railroads don't just give him rebates on his own shipments. They give him a cut of what his competitors pay. Yes, that's right. Every time a rival refinery ships oil, part of their shipping cost goes directly into Rockefeller's pocket. His competitors are literally funding their own destruction. With lower costs, Rockefeller can undercut everyone on price. Buy their crude cheaper. Sell kerosene cheaper. Still make huge profits because his real costs are half of everyone else's. By 1870, he's ready to scale. He incorporates Standard Oil Company of Ohio with $1 million in capital. That's roughly $30 million today. Now comes the consolidation. Rockefeller starts buying rivals, but not with cash, with threats. He walks into a competitor's office, shows them the numbers. Quote, "We can afford to sell at a loss until you're bankrupt, or you can sell to us now and walk away with something." End quote. Most sell. The ones who don't face a different tactic. Standard Oil drops prices in their markets below cost, bleeds money until the competitor folds, then jacks prices back up. It's predatory pricing. It's anti-competitive. It works perfectly. 1872. The South Improvement Company scheme. Rockefeller and the railroads create a cartel to control all oil shipping. When it leaks, there's public outrage. The scheme collapses in months. But Rockefeller has already used it to buy dozens of competitors during the panic. The scale of the consolidation is breathtaking. Between 1872 and 1874, Rockefeller absorbs 25 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. He calls it "our plan." His competitors call it the Cleveland Massacre. By 1875, Standard Oil controls 25% of American refining. By 1880, 90%. Let's talk about the money. At the peak of Standard Oil's monopoly, the company was refining over 90% of American oil. The profit margins were between 300 and 500%. Think about that. For every dollar of cost, Rockefeller made $3 to $5 in profit. By 1890, Standard Oil's annual income was around $70 million. That's over $2 billion in today's money. Every year. Rockefeller personally owned about 30% of the company. His annual income in the 1890s was over $20 million. That's $600 million per year in today's terms. By 1913, when he retired, Rockefeller's net worth was approximately $1.5 billion. Adjusted for inflation and economic growth, that's between $350 and $400 billion in modern wealth. To put that in perspective, Jeff Bezos at his peak was worth about $200 billion. Bill Gates, $100 billion. Elon Musk, $250 billion at his highest. Rockefeller was richer than any of them, and he did it with a monopoly that gave him profit margins tech billionaires can only dream of. That money flowed everywhere. Into banks, into railroads, into mining, into real estate. The Rockefeller fortune became embedded in the American economy. Here's how the monopoly actually worked on the ground. Standard Oil didn't just refine oil. Rockefeller understood something fundamental: Control every stage of production, and you control everything. Vertical integration. He didn't just build refineries. He bought oil fields, built pipelines, purchased tank cars, established distribution networks, owned retail outlets. By the 1880s, Standard Oil was mining its own crude, transporting it in its own pipelines and railroads, refining it in its own facilities, storing it in its own tanks, and selling it through its own dealers. A barrel of oil never left Standard Oil's control from the moment it came out of the ground until a customer bought kerosene at a store. This gave Rockefeller two massive advantages. First, he captured profit at every stage. Second, he could squeeze out anyone who competed at any single stage. If you owned oil fields, he could refuse to transport your crude. If you owned a refinery, he could refuse to sell you crude. If you owned retail stores, he could cut off your supply. The famous story of Schofield, Schirmer, and Teagle, a Cleveland refinery that refused to sell to Standard Oil. Rockefeller waited, watched. When they needed to ship oil, the railroad suddenly had no capacity available. When they needed to buy crude, sellers were contracted elsewhere. Within months, they were bankrupt. Rockefeller bought the assets for cents on the dollar. But the real genius was information control. Standard Oil had agents everywhere. They knew every competitor's costs, output, shipments, and customers. Rockefeller called it the intelligence department. Industrial espionage disguised as market research. If a competitor cut a deal with a railroad, Standard Oil knew within days. If a new oil field opened, Standard Oil knew the production numbers before the driller did. If a rival was struggling financially, Standard Oil knew before the rival's own partners. This information asymmetry was as valuable as the monopoly itself. And then there were the trust arrangements. In 1882, Standard Oil created a new corporate structure, the trust. Shareholders of various Standard Oil companies exchanged their stock for trust certificates. All decisions were made by 9 trustees, led by Rockefeller. This allowed Standard Oil to operate across state lines while appearing to be separate companies. It was a legal fiction designed to evade state corporation laws. When Ohio tried to regulate Standard Oil, Rockefeller simply moved operations to New Jersey under a new corporate charter. The monopoly continued unchanged. By 1890, Standard Oil had effective control over 90% of refined oil, 90% of pipelines, 90% of railroad tank cars, 70% of crude oil production. It wasn't just a monopoly, it was total market domination. And the tactics got darker. Standard Oil agents would approach independent dealers with ultimatums. Sell only Standard Oil products, or we'll open a competing store next door and sell at a loss until you're bankrupt. Most dealers caved. The ones who didn't faced economic warfare. There are documented cases of Standard Oil opening competing stations across the street from independents, selling kerosene below cost for months, driving the independent out of business, then closing the competing station and raising prices. It wasn't competition. It was elimination. Ida Tarbell was a journalist whose father had been ruined by Standard Oil's tactics. In 1904, she published The History of the Standard Oil Company in McClure's magazine. 19 installments, exhaustively researched, devastating in detail. Quote, "The Standard has done more than any other single agency to teach the American people that business in this country is not a matter of fair and honorable competition, but of trickery, special privilege, and organized oppression." End quote. The public was shocked, not because they didn't know monopolies existed, but because Tarbell documented exactly how Standard Oil built and maintained its power. Secret rebates, predatory pricing, corporate espionage, political corruption, all laid out with names, dates, and documents. The outrage finally forced action. 1890. The Sherman Antitrust Act passes. It's the first federal law attempting to limit monopolies and cartels. Quote, "Every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy, in restraint of trade or commerce is declared to be illegal." End quote. Standard Oil ignores it. The law has no enforcement mechanism, no regulatory agency. It's symbolic. But the public pressure is building. State after state files lawsuits against Standard Oil. Most fail. The company's legal team is better funded than entire state attorney general offices. 1906. The federal government finally moves. Theodore Roosevelt's Justice Department files suit under the Sherman Act. United States versus Standard Oil Company. The trial is massive. Testimony from hundreds of witnesses. Thousands of documents entered as evidence. The government presents a devastating case of anti-competitive behavior. 1898 railroad rebate agreements, predatory pricing in specific markets, documented intimidation of competitors, corporate espionage operations. Standard Oil's defense is essentially, "We're efficient. Our profits come from being better than everyone else." The government's response, "You're efficient because you eliminated competition through illegal means." The case drags on for 4 years. November 1909. The Circuit Court rules for the government. Standard Oil is an illegal monopoly. The company appeals to the Supreme Court. May 15, 1911. The Supreme Court upholds the ruling. Chief Justice Edward White writes the opinion. Quote, "No disinterested mind can survey the period in question without being irresistibly driven to the conclusion that the very genius for commercial development and organization soon began an intent and purpose to exclude others from the oil business." End quote. The court orders Standard Oil dissolved into 34 separate companies. Rockefeller is 67 years old. He's already retired from day-to-day management. And he's about to get even richer. Here's the beautiful irony from his perspective. Breaking up Standard Oil creates 34 separate companies. Rockefeller owns shares in all of them. The companies compete, driving up efficiency and profits. The share prices soar. Between 1911 and 1913, Rockefeller's wealth nearly doubles because of the breakup meant to punish him. Those 34 companies? They become ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Conoco, and others. The Standard Oil family tree dominates oil for the next century. Rockefeller extracted maximum wealth from the monopoly, then extracted maximum wealth from its dissolution. It was the perfect crime. But here's where the story takes its most cynical turn. Because even while building the monopoly, Rockefeller was planning how to be remembered. From the 1880s forward, Rockefeller was obsessed with two things: making money and managing his reputation. He hired Ivy Lee, one of America's first public relations consultants. Lee's job was to transform Rockefeller from robber baron to beloved philanthropist. The strategy was simple. Give away money, lots of money, very publicly. 1891. Rockefeller gives his first major gift, $600,000 to the University of Chicago. That's over $20 million today. But there were conditions. The university couldn't criticize Standard Oil. Faculty couldn't teach about monopolies in ways that reflected badly on Rockefeller. The history of how the money was made was to be omitted from official university histories. The University of Chicago today has an endowment of over $8 billion. The Rockefeller seed money is rarely mentioned in campus literature. When it is, it's framed as generous philanthropy, not as monopoly profits buying academic legitimacy. 1893. Rockefeller establishes the General Education Board to promote education in the South. Sounds noble. But the board's real function was to improve Rockefeller's image after the Standard Oil scandals. 1901. The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. Later becomes Rockefeller University. Major contributions to medical science. Funded entirely by monopoly profits. 1913. The Rockefeller Foundation. Initial endowment, $250 million. That's over $7 billion today. The foundation's charter included language about promoting the well-being of mankind throughout the world. No mention of where the money came from. No acknowledgement of the competitors destroyed, the markets manipulated, the politicians bribed. By the 1920s, Rockefeller's transformation was complete. Newspapers called him the world's greatest philanthropist. Children were taught he was a model citizen. His monopoly tactics were forgotten or reframed as aggressive business strategy. The whitewashing was systematic. Go to the Rockefeller Archive Center today. It houses John D. Rockefeller's papers. The official biography on their website mentions Standard Oil in passing. The monopoly conviction gets 2 sentences. The focus is entirely on philanthropy. Go to the University of Chicago. Rockefeller's name is everywhere. The gift is celebrated. How the fortune was made. Barely mentioned. Go to Rockefeller Center in New York. An American landmark, a tourist destination. No plaques explaining that it was built with money from an illegal monopoly. The descendants have been meticulous about controlling the narrative. The Rockefeller family still operates multiple philanthropic organizations. They still fund universities. They still attach the family name to respectable causes. And they never talk about the 1870s and 80s, the Cleveland Massacre, the railroad rebates, the predatory pricing, the corporate espionage. That history has been scrubbed. Here's the hypocrisy at its most blatant. Rockefeller was a devout Baptist his entire life, taught Sunday school, gave testimony about Christian values and morality. The same man who, quote, taught Sunday school, end quote, was simultaneously bribing railroad officials, crushing competitors, and building a monopoly that courts would declare illegal. He saw no contradiction. In his mind, business was separate from morality. The rules that applied in church didn't apply in the boardroom. Quote from Rockefeller: "I believe it is my duty to make money and still more money, and to use the money I make for the good of my fellow man according to the dictates of my conscience." End quote. Translation: accumulate wealth by any means necessary, then decide later how to spend it. The Carnegie approach to capitalism. Brutal competition followed by conspicuous philanthropy. And it worked. By the time Rockefeller died in 1937 at age 97, he was remembered primarily as a philanthropist, not as a monopolist. The New York Times obituary focused on his charitable giving. The monopoly was mentioned, but framed as controversial business practices rather than systematic illegal activity. So where did all that money go? The Rockefeller fortune fragmented across 6 generations, but it hasn't disappeared. The family wealth is estimated at $11 billion today. That's just what's publicly known. The Rockefeller Foundation has an endowment of over $5 billion. It operates in over 100 countries, all funded by the original monopoly profits, Rockefeller University. Endowment, $3 billion, one of the world's premier biomedical research institutions, the University of Chicago. Endowment, over $8 billion. Rockefeller's initial gifts were essential to its founding and early growth. ExxonMobil and Chevron, descendants of Standard Oil, are among the world's largest corporations. Combined market value over $500 billion. The Standard Oil family tree includes ExxonMobil, merger of Esso Standard Oil New Jersey and Mobil Standard Oil New York. Chevron, merger of Standard Oil California and Gulf Oil. BP America, acquired Standard Oil Ohio. Marathon, Standard Oil Ohio assets. Amoco, Standard Oil Indiana. These companies have spent over a century maintaining profitability in ways Rockefeller would recognize: lobbying, political donations, market manipulation where possible within legal bounds. The tactics evolved. The strategy remained the same. Control supply, control price, maximize profit. And the Rockefeller name remains prestigious. Rockefeller Center, Rockefeller Plaza, Rockefeller Foundation grants. All built on a fortune that courts declared came from illegal monopolistic practices. Let's be clear about what happened here. Rockefeller made $400 billion by eliminating competition through tactics that were later ruled illegal. Those profit margins, 300 to 500%, weren't from innovation. They were from total market control. Then he spent decades buying historical amnesia. The philanthropy was real. The medical advances it funded were genuine. But it doesn't change where the money came from. Should institutions built on monopoly profits acknowledge that history? Should the Rockefeller Foundation explain its endowment's origins? Should universities named after robber barons teach how those fortunes were made? These are uncomfortable questions, but they matter because the pattern continues. Build market dominance through aggressive tactics, extract extraordinary profits, give some away publicly, have your name attached to prestigious institutions. A century later, you're remembered as a visionary philanthropist. The monopoly becomes a footnote. Rockefeller perfected this playbook. He proved that extreme wealth can buy not just power, but historical absolution. The descendants live in comfort. The institutions bear his name with pride. The tactics that made it possible are buried in court records most people will never read. That's the real story of oil in America. Not just energy, but the blueprint for how monopoly profits became respectable fortunes. Anyway, that's it from me. If you want to learn more about monopolies, corporate power, and the real history behind America's great fortunes, there are links in the description. My name is Ayman, and you've been watching Threads of Civilization. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.